We are currently talking about renewing the mind and entering into the mind of faith, dealing with our self-will, our emotions that ensue out of that self-will, and the strength of following God and His leading. We know that when feeling and emotion has run its course, the believer still must deal with the matters of the mind by the breaking of self-will. I told you last time that I would help you with 4 questions. Well, here are those 4 questions, and they are helpful to assessing spiritual condition as it relates to self-will. These questions are just like the doctor taking the patient's blood pressure. They show the status of self-will in the believer's life. These questions are designed not to bring condemnation, but rather to bring liberty and healing to the mind of faith. Number 1, have I been long-suffering today? Number 2, have I used gentleness today? Number 3, have I been forbearing in love today? And number 4, have I been humble and willing to do as asked today? This may not seem like a strong mind of question, but just think about it a moment. Have you had to be long-suffering today? That's the question of the mind. It's awful easy to say you have when it necessarily wasn't a have to, because a test is not a test until it comes as a test. Have you had to use gentleness today when you could have used hardness? Have you had to be forbearing in love today? Have you been humble and willing to do as you were asked to do today? These are questions that go on every day of your life. And you think that everything's fine, and then all of a sudden something shows up that causes you to have to be humble and willing. And then the question is fact. You see, self-will in the mind will lead one to vaunt themselves. The Bible calls this being puffed up. This is to be led by the desires of the mind and not other people. Many wonder where they stumble and fall continually. Self-will always causes one to fall. Self-will's opposite is not vainglory. I was raised in a society, in a culture, where they fought to keep vainglory out of the way, and many times we would laugh at how somebody was putting on the humble coat or trying to be humble because they didn't want to be glorious. You see, self-will's opposite is not vainglory. The opposite of the spirit of self-will is willingness and humbleness. What is mankind but the dust of the earth? Is it not misunderstood that the drive of the diseased mind of faith is to make personal opinion more important than anyone else? The warfare in modern lifestyle is often considered the right of the individual to have their own personality or their personal opinion. Struggling with these in the area of the carnal becomes not a fight of their personality, but one of the individual's will. You see, the believer battles for wisdom. The diseased mind of faith of the unbeliever is battling for their own way. This must not be misunderstood by the believer and considered to be self-will on the part of the believer. Wisdom in dealing with self-willed, or the self-willed children of your mind, is important and necessary. Emotions will drive your self-will higher and higher and louder, seeking to gain its own will. And this one human trait has caused much of the chaos in the earth. And I just ask you today, as we move forward into the rest of our day, without self-will, who would need locks and bolts? You see, everything is driven in a person by the will of the person. The garden allowed the will of the person to now do as it wished. It kept them from being God. We are not God, and that's why we have to submit ourselves to the will of God, and many times we do that through repentance as it becomes the self-alignment tool to bring you into right standing with God. And then the diseased mind of faith starts healing, and the renewal of the mind of faith for daily miracles comes your behalf, and you're strong. God bless you. See you next time.